Everybody, thanks for jumping on today. Today we're going to talk about some things that Rob and I get a lot of questions on. Why are we harping on you to do certain things? And then it's followed up with, is this really a rule or is this just something that we're making up? And so we're going to go through some of the affirmative duties as an agent, some of the things that we should be doing with our clients on every transaction every day. So there is a good number on today. I'm going to ask quite a bit of questions. So if there's a way that you can come off mute and answer, that would make this a little bit more interactive, because the best way we learn is through some experiences we've had with specific things. And so if you've had some experiences with some of these duties, either in a positive way or a negative way, I think we can all learn from them. So I'm going to go through them. I'm going to share my screen with you so you can kind of see them, and we'll go through them. There's a fair number of them, but they're kind of linked into different types of categories. So we've got probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 categories that we can go through, but and we can spend as much time on each one as you guys feel as necessary, and we can blow through the ones that are pretty self-explanatory. But before we get started, is anybody have any specific questions they want us to make sure we cover today? We can make sure we leave time for that. Is there anything specific?
Nothing that I can think of.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and this is just going to be a whole bunch of words because it's basically the division rules, but sometimes it's easier as we talk through them, you can kind of see where they are. So let me just share my screen real quick. Hopefully that's big enough. Rob, can you see that? Is that big enough for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, if you can, I think it's fine. There's space if you want to make it a little bit bigger. You've got some room to do it, but otherwise I can see it just fine.
Okay. Well, I have this giant monitor, and it's like I'm an old man reading this giant paper. So it comes down on your guys' screen, it's small, but for me, it's I got to back up for a second. But all right, so in our rules, we have different duties as agents we have to fulfill. These are things that if we do everything right, problems still can come up. They still do come up. But when we cover our bases and when we're doing everything that we're supposed to be doing in a transaction, it makes life so much easier for you if a problem ever arises. So if anything ever comes up in some kind of a disagreement or a lawsuit or something like that, and you've covered all of your bases and we can prove that you covered all your bases, there's a good chance that they could pull you out of that. And that's why we go through these things. We go through these things so that you know there's certain things that we need to do as agents and certain things that when we go through these, you'll notice that some agents don't do. They don't focus on, it's not a priority to them. So my challenge to you today is as we go through these, don't just brush them off as, yeah, I know that. Really understand how are you implementing these in your own business. So we're going to kind of go through this. If I highlight that, can you see it as I highlight it?
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
And just as you're about to go to these first few, Jason, where it's talking about our fiduciary duties, I just want to point out one thing. We've received a demand letter from, just last week, we received a demand letter from an attorney where his seller, who we represented on a pretty big deal. There were 2 properties, each worth about $1 million. So $2 million total. And it was about $120,000 in commissions. And the deal closed, and the seller just felt like, for whatever reason, and I'm guessing it was $120,000 reason, 120,000 reasons why, that the agent didn't do their fiduciary duties. And so when Jason's going to go through this stuff, just be mindful that these aren't just words. So this demand letter, and if we don't, they're asking for that $120,000 back. And if we don't pay it, then they're claiming they're going to sue us because they're claiming that our agent didn't do their fiduciary duty. So just pay attention with what Jason's saying. Our world has shifted so much right now that everything that we're doing, we're under a microscope, and we need to take extra precaution to make sure that A, we are doing the things we're supposed to be doing, and B, if we're being accused of something that we are not doing, that we can validate or prove or defend our position. So pay attention to what's here. These aren't just words. This is a real, it's a real world scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we're actually bringing up these rules today, just so that you guys can see it, because it's becoming more of a problem and that we're going to see, and we just need to protect ourselves. We have a great industry. We've got a great thing going for us. And, you know, anytime that something comes up that's, whether it's warranted or not warranted, it really stresses, I can tell you, it stresses the agents out as they go through it. So in this first section, it's talking about our fiduciary duties. This is one of the big things that when somebody is filing a complaint against us, or they're coming back from a transaction that they had, that there's a complaint, it has to do with one of these 5 fiduciary duties. So the first one here is loyalty, which obligates the agent to place their best interest of the principal above any other interest, including the agent's own. The biggest thing I see with this one is, you know, if you're dealing with a client that you have different ideas, or you have different things, like say you want to buy the property, if they don't buy the property, their best interest needs to come before yours. Their best interest needs to come before others. We saw a big problem with this last year when, and probably you guys have had this experience where you had 4 or 5 buyers that were looking at the exact same home, and they all wanted to put an offer on the same home. This is a challenge with this one, is we have to be able to be loyal to that client and be best interest. So you've got to look at those scenarios and see how you can be loyal in that category. Next one is obedience, which obligates the agent to obey any lawful instruction from the principal. If they're asking you to do something that's not legal, that's not what this is talking about. This is, if they ask you to make a call, talk to the other person about it. I've seen complaints come in where the client says, well, I asked them to call the agent, all they did was text the agent. You know, these are things that are lawful instructions given by your client. And if they ask you to do it a specific way, then I would suggest you do it the specific way. It doesn't pertain to if it's, you know, don't tell them this is something illegal, don't tell them. That's different than being obedient to what they're asking you to do. Sometimes we get in this habit of doing it our way when we're asked a different way from our principal. We've got to be, where our client, we've got to be able to understand them. At any point in this, if you guys have questions, please reach out, or an experience that deals with these.
Nathan,
yes.
Can I ask a question? Or so I was representing the buyer on a certain transaction. Well, not that we had put in an offer, we were putting in an offer, and the buyers asked if through the agents we could get a message to the seller. And the agent, as I explained that the buyers would like the seller to understand a certain thing that they would like them to know, the agent kept saying, well, we talked on Friday. So this was like Saturday, or Monday. We talked on Friday, and this, I think it was something about, I can't even remember, but he would not pass along that message to the sellers. And I repeated myself twice, could you please pass this information along to the sellers? And he just kept saying he wouldn't do it. He just said, just turn in your offer and we'll see how it goes. And that's all I said. So can you comment on that? Is there anything that we can do? I know we just sent in some information with our offer and asked that to be passed along, but is there anything that can do, or,
Well, this pertains to two different scenarios here. One is your client's asking you to do something. They said, pass this on to the seller. Your obligation is to pass it on to the seller's agent. We don't have, and maybe Rob, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but we don't have control or any way of forcing a seller's agent to pass on information to their client. That's beyond our scope of being able to control that. That's if somebody passed on something to you that was not in the best interest of your client for them to review or see, you wouldn't necessarily have to do that. So I don't think there's anything that can force a seller's agent to pass on information to their client just because we're requesting it.
thank you. I just, but I asked, which was my obligation from my buyer, correct?
Correct. So you did what you were supposed to do based on this, what your client asked, and you did it to the best of your ability, which was pass it on to their agent, which is their representative. So, I've seen this before where the buyer client went around the agents and started talking to the seller's agent. We just need to not facilitate that type of a discussion. We need to take it straight to their agent.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jason's correct on what he's saying. Look at it from this perspective. Fiduciary duty we have to our clients. So you have that duty to your client, Chris, just like the listing agent has a duty to their client. Now, what we don't know, is it possible that the seller informed the listing agent, I don't want to hear anything until we actually have an offer in hand. If there's, don't come to me with questions, don't do anything until we actually have an offer. And if that's the case, then the listing agent's doing it. The next, what Jason's going to go over next is talking about full disclosure. So the fiduciary duty of that listing agent that they have is the information that you are sharing. If it's a material fact, then they have an obligation to disclose that to the seller. So we just have to trust that that's going to happen, and we don't know if it's happened or it's not. So you telling the listing, hey, will you communicate this to your seller? They may or may not do it, but that's all that we can control.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so that's the biggest challenge with this, working with other agents. We want to be really cooperative with it. We saw that last year when people would post on their MLS, don't send love letters. I'm getting 20 offers and I have 20 love letters. I'm not submitting those to my client. So that this full disclosure, material facts of the transaction, confidentiality. This is what we've got to make sure that we have permission to give information out. We find that as a big one where we're not discussing with our clients whether we're going to discuss how offers are, multiple offers are received, if there's offers, not offers. We run into that problem quite a bit. Let's see. Property. Yeah, so those are the 5. No, actually, we got a couple more. Reasonable care and due diligence is one of them, and then the last one is this. So that's the 5 that we're talking about, and then here's one that's in addition to any duties created by the agency agreement. So we have to really understand what our agency agreement is. That's our ERS or our buyer broker agreement, because if there's other duties that we put in there that we're willing to do, that falls under some of these fiduciary duties. So there's the main 5 that we're dealing with, but then if you implement anything else in there, that's something that you've got to follow as well. So any questions on the fiduciary duties?
Nope.
Okay, so number 2 is we're talking about individual agency and executing a written agreement. Okay, we get pushback on this an awful lot about, oh, I didn't get my buyer broker agreement done. In fact, I think, Rob, 2 weeks ago, I think we had one that had closed and still hadn't had their buyer broker agreement done
So-
after it was closed. So that creates a problem. It's part of the scope of our business is to get it written, a written agency agreement between individuals and principals. We needed to find the sellers who we represent, the buyers who we represent. And if we represent both of them in a limited agency in the same transaction, we're going to talk about that just a little bit further down, but everybody has to be informed in writing, clear, and right here, clearly explaining in writing both parties. Okay. And this is one that we kind of put lightly because I don't know if there's fear that the client won't sign the paper and they'll go work with some other agent. And so we just don't want to ruffle the feathers, or we don't want to talk about the commission with them yet, but this has to happen right here. Obtain prior informed consent before you do any of that. So if our practice is, I'm going to work with my client until we write an offer, and then I'm going to put the offer, and then I'm going to slide the buyer broker agreement in there, we're setting ourselves up for a problem in the future. I would highly suggest that once you start showing them homes, and once you start giving them advice in real estate, that you have something written down to make sure that you're covered with this.
Hey, Jason, this is also a two-part thing. I can't tell you how many times agents will reach out to me and say, well, I've been showing homes for 2-3 months. And then all of a sudden, another agent came in and found a home, and the client decided to work with this other agent. Well, like, do you have a buyer broker agreement signed? I'm like, no. So there's multiple aspects of this. One, yes, before a offer is written, we've got to establish agency. And in this section, you would need the buyer broker and the limited agency. But just the practical coaching side of this is you're working hard for your money. You want to make sure that client is loyal to you, just like you're being loyal to them. And we would love it if that loyalty was strong enough without having the paper. But my experience is it doesn't seem to be that way very often. So get this to protect you. And a simple sales pitch on this is saying, if Jason was my buyer, I'd be like, Jason, let me ask you, in today's market, I assume that if you can get the best price for a home, would you prefer to pay the lowest amount for a property, or would you rather pay either more if necessary, or would you rather pay a lot more to the seller if that's all you could do? What would you prefer to have? A better deal, an okay deal, or a great deal?
Great deal.
Great deal. Okay. Completely understand where you're coming from, Jason. And that is possible in today's market. Now, but the one thing that helps make this work is by us working together, because I come across great deals all the time. And as part of the responsibilities I have is on my fiduciary duties is to give that information to my clients. Well, how we determine who my clients are once we've established an agency relationship. And once I have that information, I'm obligated to provide that to them first versus going to anybody else. So when these great deals come about, those clients that I've already got a written agency agreement established, those are the ones that are to get that information first versus someone else that has yet to sign anything and establish agency. So again, you can see that we're working together and you feel confident what we're doing. Isn't it the best for you that we go ahead and get this established so that you can take advantage of what the market's bringing to you?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's really the key, is get better at what your scripts are and just make sure that it's happening. Now let's talk just a little bit about, let's say that we represent both parties. Okay. So one right here, we need a written acknowledgement from each party affirming the party waives the rights to So when I'm doing a limited agency, there's some rights, our fiduciary rights that we are, it's not possible for us to keep, okay? One, undivided loyalty, absolute confidentiality, and full disclosure from the licensee. We need the written authorization from them to do that, because they're basically waiving the rights to have those, because now we're representing both parties. It doesn't necessarily mean that that gives me free reign for each client. I can do whatever I want with them. It's not, that's not what this is saying. There's still things, fiduciaries, that we have to do, and we have to keep things in, confident between them, but you just have to be really careful when you navigate a limited agency party. Personally, unless you have a relationship with both of them, if you represent the seller, I would have the buyer be an unrepresented buyer. But if you want to do both of them, then it's added liability to you, but it's also doable. You just need to know that these are the things that you can't do. I had an agent the other day, they represent the seller, and they have a buyer that they were working with, and they told the buyer that, oh yeah, you can go ahead and bring in a lower offer and we can just see what happens. That's a problem. Coaching them through, what the other party's willing to take and what they're not willing to take. So we have to be really careful with navigating those things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now we're going to jump into number 5 here. When making an offer or soliciting to buy or sell, lease, rent a property, either directly or indirectly, as an agent for a client, the licensee shall disclose in the initial contract with the parties the fact that the licensee holds a license with a division, whether the license status is active or inactive. So because we have an actual license to sell real estate, that has to be disclosed. If we're buying a personal property, if we're selling our personal property, if we're buying, if we're interacting with clients, that we have to disclose that we actually have a license to do this. And we have the addendum in there. You can do that in the addendum, but it comes before even writing the offer. It's just disclosing that you have an active license, or you have a real estate license in Utah. It needs to be on your initial contact that you, who you represent in there. Pretty self-explanatory. Number 6, let's see. Disclose in writing to your clients or anybody that's unrepresented. So this continues on with this, making sure that everybody knows that there is a licensee that's involved with it, especially if you're buying your own property, if you're selling your own property. We've got to make sure, just disclose that.
Well, this is the actual part that makes it very clear. Before entering into a binding purchase agreement, so before entering into a Repc, number 6, then you've got to go down to 6C, the licensee's agency relationship. So when you put those two sentences together, before entering into a Repc, you've got to define agency, which is where the buyer broker and of course the ERS, when you take a listing, is effective. But at the latest opportunity, before writing a Repc, writing a lease, anything like that, you've got to have a buyer broker agreement signed.
Yeah. So that just reiterates the fact that I think that's one of the things that Rob and I get pushed back a lot when we talk about just get this thing signed. Everyone has their own timing. They like to get it signed, but I can tell you the sooner the better for your case in this process. Okay, number 7, before offering on any property for sale or lease, make reasonable effort to verify accuracy and the content of the information and data to be used in the marketing of the property. Okay, so I've had this before where as agents, we rely a lot on the MLS printout sheet.
Mm-hmm.
That does not remove this obligation for us to make reasonable efforts to verify the accuracy of it. So if there's questions on the MLS, it's, we like to blame the seller, the listing agent, for not giving us the right information. But this is stating that we need to make sure that we're doing our due diligence too, which is why we have our buyers sign the buyer due diligence checklist and our the different forms we have here is to help us, one, identify if there's specific questions they have and we can dig deeper into it, but two, to be able to really protect ourselves through that process. So this is number 8 is talking about if you're listing a property to sell, we just need to mark where we're getting the square footage from. That box I've seen not checked a few times in the exclusive right to sell. That's something that can come back and get your client. If your client says, oh, we have 4,000 square feet, but they only have 3,200 square feet, and we didn't disclose where it is, that gives the buyer the right to go back after the seller, which ultimately could come back at us for not having that information disclosed right. So those are just small things in our rules that they pulled out to really identify it. Now, most rules come about because of some problem that was happening. If you look at in California, their Repc is like 19 pages long, because every time there's a problem, they added another page, another paragraph. Ours is not that long yet, but there are things in our rules. As you can see, we're identifying the square footage specifically in this one, where we need to make sure we're identifying where we got it from. I always looked at it and say, if we have an accurate source, identify where that accurate source is. If not, then you need to disclose where you're getting that from. Let's see, I think that's all on that one. Jump down to number 9. Upon initial contact with another agent in transaction, disclose the agency relationship between the licensee and the client. I see this one messed up a lot in like open houses. When somebody comes in, you've got to disclose that you represent the seller in this transaction. Just make sure that they know who is being represented. Continuing on with disclosure, number 10, when executing a binding agreement of sales transaction, confirm the prior agency disclosure. So that's, we've got it in the Repc that you can do that. That's where now they have the broker and the numbers you have to put in there. That's all trying to fulfill that one obligation. Number 12, we're just going to touch on this for a minute. But if the licensee desires to act as a sub-agent for showing a property owned by a seller who is under contract with another brokerage before showing the seller's property. Okay, I just want to bring this up because this is something as a licensee we do, but as Century 21 agents we do not do. We do not do sub-agency in our brokerage. So if someone's asking you to do sub-agency on that, we will not do that. 13, provide copies of lease purchase agreement, property signed by each party to the parties for whom the licensee acts as an agent. We just need to make sure we're getting all the information that we need to our clients. And that's one that's in the section 7 of our Repc, where the seller's disclosures that sometimes get missed.
This is also a ethics violation in regards of, I think it's under Article 9, where we're obligated to provide our clients with copies of everything. And then the Code of Ethics goes one step further, that we take time explaining the documents that they're signing. So we don't just send stuff and have them sign it just because they sign it. We don't take the time and effort to explain it.
Yeah. So, and I see that a lot towards the end of transactions where the client doesn't have a copy of everything that they've signed. We got to get in the habit of, once you get all the signatures, that they get another copy of it. I see that where we get a counteroffer from our client signed, we send it to the other client, they sign it, and then we don't actually forward the fully executed contract. They only have half of the contract. So just make sure that you're getting all of the contracts to each party that's fully signed. 14, identify the seller's brokerage in paragraph 5 of the Repc. This is the one we just talked about, just making sure that that information is correct. You've probably seen it flagged that if you miss it, then we're asking you to do an addendum to put it in there because of this rule right here. It's not that, you know, if you put the brokerage name, but you don't put the brokerage number on there, we just need to make sure that we're doing that correct. So you'll see that flagged because of this rule right here, not just because as a brokerage, we want to make sure that you're having to do more addendums. That's one that we need to make sure is part of the rules. Okay, 15, this is one that we see an awful lot. Timely inform the licensed principal broker, that'd be Rob, or branch broker, of the real estate transactions in which we're involved in. I'm going to open this up for a quick answer. Where do you do this? How do you fulfill this in our company? How is this fulfilled? How are you accomplishing this? Or do we know?
Jason, would maybe a place be if we're using a transaction coordinator
Okay.
through
So
that process?
What is the transaction coordinator doing to inform us? So either you're informing us or the transaction coordinator is informing us on what you're doing. So whether you use a transaction coordinator or not, something's happening to inform us.
Well, we submit through, you know, through
Higher
doc loop, our loop once we are under contract.
Yes. Okay. So that's where I was getting is .loop is the system that we use as a company to accomplish this rule. So when you put it in .loop and you click in the upper right corner, submit for review, that triggers for us to know that you're doing something. Now there's too many transactions, and you probably have in your own folders, like, you know, test ones and stuff that you're just doing some information. They're not really full transactions that you're doing yet. Because of that, there's probably thousands of them that are put in a position where we don't even look at them. Okay, so when you actually submit to review, that's when we will, that's when this is accomplished, when this rule is accomplished. So that's how we get that done. Any questions on that?
Nope.
And this is important, guys, for many reasons, because one of the duties that I have as the principal broker is I have to actively manage my agents. Well, it's obvious that the only way that I can actively manage is if I'm aware of certain things. And it's not just putting everything in .loop, because we get a lot of people that will upload things into .loop, but they never submit the loop for review. So it's a dumping ground for a bunch of information, but the way that you're notifying me as the broker or our staff is when you submit the loop for review, that's when the information gets pushed to our department to take a look at whatever's been done. Otherwise, it would be no different than the old version, the way that we used to have paper files. I mean, back in the old days, you would create a file for yourself, and then you had to turn that file when you got a Repc or whatever, you would turn it into the office. Well, if you don't submit it for review, you've created the file for yourself, but you haven't turned it into me. And so when we're asking for information, we're asking for the file. Oh, I've got it. Okay, well, you may have the paperwork, but until you put it in .loop and make it aware to us, that's where the administrative rule is not being followed.
Hey, Rob, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
When I have a buyer broker, and I submit it to a loop, I usually don't submit that until I have a fully executed contract on the buyer side. On the seller side, when I have an ERS, I do, but on the buyer broker, are we okay not? Because sometimes I'll have an active buyer broker, but I won't have anything under contract, so I don't really submit it until then.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm perfectly fine if you get a buyer broker signed, you have the buyer doc signed, I'm fine with not seeing that until we actually do have a purchase agreement. because again, it's not going to be, many times there's no loop that's identified other than maybe your client's name. So that part's fine. And you're right. The difference is if it's a listing, once you take the listing, we need that to upload it, and I want to be made aware of it. But yeah, once you've submitted an offer and you go under contract, similar to earnest money, you could have the earnest money check in your possession, but until you actually have an offer that has been accepted, we don't want that information. So yeah, that's a great question, and I'm perfectly fine with that.
Okay, so that's how we use those. If you jump down to, let's see, we're going to go down to 16 here. Disclose in writing to each party the transaction and compensation in addition to any other real estate commissions that will be received in connection with the real estate agent's transaction. So we want to make sure that, one, the principal broker knows any of the compensation. It's all got to go in there. So as we all know, all money that we receive in real estate has to go through the main brokerage to be paid back to you. So it can't just be paid directly to you. 17, it says in negotiating and closing a transaction, a licensee may fill out those legal forms as provided in sections in that section. Okay, so basically our license gives us the right to fill out the contracts, not create new contracts. We're not acting as attorneys. The challenge we have is when somebody decides they're going to do an addendum to a contract and they are writing their own words when there is an addendum already created for that. So I'd be really familiar with all the addendums that we have in the multiple listing service, where you can go through and you can actually see, like, seller acquiring new property. I had an addendum written last week that was their own version of what that was supposed to say in a long, lengthy addendum. It's already created for us. Our job is to just fill out those things. If we write an addendum that something has already been created to solve the problem, we write an addendum that causes problems, that's where we get into trouble, because they're going to look at that and going to say, why didn't you use this addendum, and why'd you create your own? That's on the agent. So just be familiar with what those addendums are and use the words that an attorney has already created for us. Let's not make up our own. I kind of think a good rule of thumb is, if you're writing an addendum and it takes more than 3 lines to write, maybe pause and see if there's an addendum that's already created to say what you're trying to say, or reach out to Rob or I and see if there's something that somebody's already said. If you're having to describe something, let's see if there's something that says it already before we go into a real long detail. Rob and I have both seen addendums that are 2 pages long of writing, and it sounds like the agent is trying to be an attorney because they're using attorney words, and when it all comes down to it, everybody's confused. So if we're starting to write things that are longer than just filling out a form, let's pause for a minute and see what we can accomplish. Okay, the last couple that I wanted to go through that I thought was good. Number 19, before signing and initialing a document on behalf of a principal in a transaction, if you're signing or you're initialing for a principal, the only way you can do that is if you have power of attorney to execute for the principal. Okay, so I see this one happen mainly in the seller's disclosures, where you're going in and, oh, my client can't fill it out, so I'm going to fill it out for you. These are acts that we got to make sure that we are having our clients do. Unless you're going through and getting power of attorney to execute for them, you need to not fill out the forms for your client. Okay, I see that mainly in the seller's disclosures, but I've also seen on the Repc where your client accidentally missed the checkbox for acceptance, and the agent just goes back and says, oh, well, they already signed it, but I'm just going to put the checkbox for them. The potential problem you have with that is if they have a copy with no checkbox, and then there's a problem and say, well, we didn't check the acceptance box, and now you checked it for them,
Mm.
that could potentially be a problem for you as the agent.
One additional thing, Jason, to this is even if the agent followed the policy and what is required by the administrative rule here, meaning, hey, do you have a power of attorney or whatnot? It would be against our company policy that we would even want to support this. So, but the only consideration that would come into play, let's say that you're the power of attorney for your parents' estate, or you're the trustee or whatever. So you're the listing agent and you're in essence kind of the principal in the situation, in the transaction itself. But if you're not a principal in the transaction and you are acting as the agent and decide to become a power of attorney for the person, then even though you're following the administrative rules, that would be a conflict of interest from our company's position, and we would not support that.
Yeah. Okay, so the last one that I wanted to touch on in this list is just this number 25, as contemplated by the section. This, when notified by the division that information or documents are required for investigation purposes, respond with the required information or documents in full and within 10 business days. The division may not bring an action or enforcement of this section after the expiration of 4 years following the occurrence of the violation. The only thing I wanted to bring up with this one is this is why it's really important to have everything in your dot loop, that you just keep it maintained. You keep everything that you're dealing with your client in there, because when somebody comes to us and says, we want all of your files for a particular agent, and we send them what we have, and there's other information that you fix problems, but not in the loop, we don't have that information together. We have a time limit to get there. So out of the whole thing that we're talked about today, if I was just going to sum it up, it's we have an obligation to our clients to make sure they're protected through this whole process. We have an obligation to the brokerage to make sure that all of our information is submitted and done correctly. When we don't take that seriously, then when problems come up, it's a really hard thing for Rob and I to come in and step in and try to help. I had a call last week from a client who was upset at their agent because of certain things that were happening in the transaction. I asked for the address. I pulled up the address, and the only thing in the loop was their buyer broker agreement, and that was it. And apparently they're under contract. Apparently they're multiple addendums into the contract. It makes it really hard to step up and fight for you guys without the information that we have. Rob and I are on your team. We're trying to help you, which is why we spent some time today going through some of these rules, just because not every agent you're going to meet believes and follows the rules the way they're supposed to be followed. And the only reason that we come down on the agents is because we know what the problem will create if something happens in the transaction. It's no fun to get a demand letter, especially when your demand letter's asking for $750,000 to settle a suit before it goes to a lawsuit. So our job is to protect you, and your job is to help us do that. Any questions on any of this stuff today?
Nope.
Okay. Well, if that's all, then Rob, you have anything else?
No, that's great information, Jason. You did a great job explaining it, and not only going over the information, but what we try to show is some real world examples, so that you're not thinking, well, this doesn't really happen. That's not going to come up here. That's not going to come up there. I mean, we're sharing with you actual examples that we're dealing with. Jason had his experience. He talked about where in the loop there was only a buyer broker agreement. Well, last week I actually received a phone call 2 weeks ago. I was out of town when I received the phone call it was a phone call from the division. And I told them that once I got back in town, I would provide them with the information. But yeah, I received a phone call 2 weeks ago asking for the complete file on a transaction. And it was a transaction that I was already aware of. And one of the issues that exist on the file, and the agent already knew that it was a problem because we had already addressed it. It was an agent that represented a seller, and then a buyer wanted to come in and they were also unrepresented and wanted to make an offer. And so the agent had a limited agent agreement signed with that buyer. The transaction never went under contract. But my assumption is the deal closed and whatever, but this particular buyer that didn't get their offer accepted, I'm pretty sure they filed the complaint because the division asked for that complete file. And right off the bat, I knew that we did not have a buyer broker agreement on that file. And the agent, we don't know the results of what is going to happen, but I've already prepared the agent to say, hey, just so you know, right now, whether the transaction, the accusation that the buyer's making, I don't believe they're correct, and our agent didn't do anything wrong. But worst case scenario, the agent will at least be fined and in violation of not establishing that agency relationship for the buyer. And so I've already prepared them. I said, this is what I at least expect will happen. So these things are happening, and we're just here to hopefully help you make sure that you're not found on the other end of the stick. So.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank
you.
you.
Have a
Thanks,
great day.
Jason.
You too.
Much.